everyone, and welcome back to Astrology Sphere. So I hope you're well and that you managed to get through the 1111 portal and that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in one piece. I don't know about you, but I found it really positive. A lot of positive shifts kind of happening in certainly just after that particular set of transits, and I'm also finding that the new moon energy of Scorpio, that Scorpio new moon, is really seeing us return to kind of Jupiter vibes, which I think is going to continue into December as we go into Sagittarius season, and I think it's going to be reflected in these two eclipses which happen in the axis of Gemini and Sagittarius. So in this video, what I'm going to focus on is particularly the lunar eclipse in Gemini. That happens on the 30th of November. Of course, it has a twin in the form of the solar eclipse in Sagittarius, which happens on the 14th of December. But I'm going to do a separate video on that. So, where I feel it's appropriate, I'll touch on that eclipse, the solar eclipse. But really what I'm focusing on is A, the astrology of the lunar eclipse in Gemini, and B, I'm going to follow that up with a geoscope, which gives me some more information. When I'm doing astrology forecasts, I'm talking very generally in terms of the cosmic weather, and I feel that with the geoscopes it allows you to kind of refine that information so that you understand what of many possibilities is likely to manifest in the 3D from that 5D energy of the planet. So yeah, I find it very useful. But anyway, let's get into this forecast in a little bit more detail now. So the first thing to say is that this eclipse will happen at 8 degrees of Sagittarius and Gemini. So the full moon will be in Gemini, and the sun will be on the opposite side of the horizon at in Sagittarius. So the sun will have ingress into Sagittarius around about the 21st of November, and as I say, I think that from that ingress we're going to really start to feel that more upbeat, optimistic Jupiter energy kind of entering the scene. Jupiter's been a little bit subdued this year in the sign of Capricorn. It's traditionally where it's in detriment, so it's interesting that Jupiter has been, of those 3 planets in Capricorn, it's been the kind of the more silent partner, if you like. And now I really feel as though from that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction that we had on the 12th of November, Jupiter is going to start taking a much more prominent role as we move into Sagittarius season, which is of course ruled by Jupiter, and that's going to be seen both in the eclipses as well as in the ingress of Jupiter into Aquarius, which happens in December. So I think we're kind of building up to much more optimistic, positive energy as we move into Sagittarius season. That's the first thing to say. The other thing is that as we get to this eclipse, a number of planets are going to be moving direct. So Neptune will be moving direct, and so will Mars. So Neptune goes direct on the 29th of November, and that's Mars will also be direct. It went direct on the 14th of November. So all the planets now are direct by the time we get to this eclipse. So it's kind of all systems go as we move into the last part of December and the last part of 2020. I really feel as though we're kind of building up momentum for the next 6-month cycle that will start at that December solar eclipse in Sagittarius. So that's the first thing to say. So really the lunar eclipse in many ways is pointing the way. It's kind of almost a corridor that's taking us into the solstice energy that's happening in December, with the lunar eclipse, the solar eclipse happening in Sagittarius at the same time as the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. So they will move into we're basically heading into that solstice corridor at which Jupiter and Saturn will both ingress, into Aquarius. They will make a conjunction on the day of the solstice, and then, we have that December eclipse happening on the 14th, so about a week before that. So really moving into this energy. So this is kind of doing a little bit of clearing beforehand, and we're going to see that when we look at the chart and also the Sabian symbol for this particular lunar eclipse. So let's get into that next. Okay, so To start with, let's look at the Sabian symbol for this particular eclipse. Now the Sabian symbol refers to the degree that the eclipse is happening in, and this is based on the work of Mark Edmund Jones. He worked with a psychic, and they kind of came up with symbols for each of the degrees of the zodiac. And this follows on from very, very early ideas that were developed during the Hellenistic period of astrology. So very early on in the sort of development of Western astrology, where the degrees of the ecliptic, so in other words the degrees at which the sun was moving through the zodiac, kind of took on individual meanings, and this then went into magic and so on. So I find it also a useful way, just like with the geoscope, I find it a useful way to refine what the meaning of the zodiacal meaning of each individual eclipse is about. So this particular lunar eclipse occurs in the 9th degree of Gemini, and that is: an archer stands with the ease of one wholly sure of himself, bow in hand, his quiver filled with arrows. So I think this is really pointing us to that solar eclipse in Sagittarius, which is happening in December. Sagittarius is the archer, it's the centaur with a bow and an arrow. So I think really pointing to this idea of using this lunar eclipse to focus ourselves fully on the future and on what we want to manifest and project forward into the future in terms of our own intentions and what we wish for 2021. Now, some keywords around this are being armed and ready, having the aim and the ammunition, accuracy and strength, getting to the point, and of course sending a message kind of forward into the future, bullseyes, all of that kind of thing. So I think it's really, really telling us to kind of hone our vision, sharpen our focus, and decide what it is that we want in the future going into 2021. Because 2020 has really been a year of disruption in many ways. It's been a year of letting go of the old, really cutting back to the bare bones of things, getting clear on what's important to us, our priorities, where we might have gone off track a bit in life, where we might have got stuck in codependency, addictions, distractions, where we also may have gone off track because of misinformation or disinformation. And of course that's a big theme whenever we've got the Gemini Sagittarius axis in play. We are talking about the difference between information and data on one hand, so knowledge, and then the wisdom of discernment, of lived experience, and of the kind of spiritual overview or perspective, the higher perspective of information, because information in and of itself isn't necessarily useful unless we know how to apply it to our lives, or discerning between which information we resonate with and we feel is more important than, say, other information. Okay, so let's look at the chart for this particular full moon lunar eclipse. So it's interesting for a number of reasons. So first of all, as I said, we've got the sun and the moon at 8 degrees of Gemini and Sagittarius, so they're on opposite sides of the earth. So in and of itself, that means that we are trying to balance things. And as I said, the zodiac signs for me point to a balance between knowledge and information on one hand, and wisdom and spiritual downloads or perspectives on the other, as well as from spiritual teachers and gurus. So that's the other sort of thing to say about this. But what's interesting for me in this chart is a couple of things. So the first thing is that once again we've got Neptune in a T-squared to the nodes. So you'll notice that the nodes are also in the same sign of Gemini and Sagittarius. They aren't always in the same sign as the sun and the moon at eclipses, and that will often determine how closely we are to a total eclipse, or that kind of thing. So this is an A-pulse lunar eclipse, and so the nodes are at a slightly different degree to the sun and the moon. Sun and the moon are in early degrees of Gemini Sag, and the nodes are at slightly later degrees. So what's interesting is that if we think about this eclipse, it's very similar in configuration, this T-square, to that June lunar eclipse we had in Sagittarius, where we had Mars conjunct Neptune, and they were making a T-square to the nodes at that time. And for me that was very, very significant, because it pointed to what I saw as the kind of the start of the kind of disinformation campaigns that were happening, particularly online and on social media and in social media groups, that I think was fomenting a lot of civil unrest and social confusion on many levels. And I think that then culminated in a lot of kind of rioting, anger being expressed, confusion, which just muddied the waters, I think, as far as distracting people from what it is that they were actually supposed to be doing, which was, doing internal work, shedding, kind of ego patterns, subconscious patterns, that kind of thing. So I kind of felt as though we're being asked to just remember that, particularly in light of the current American elections that we've just had. And of course that also had a lot of Gemini Sagittarius overtures to it. The second is, of course, that Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is actually quite prominent at this particular lunar eclipse. It will be making a sextile to Saturn. So again, for me, this is about emphasizing the importance of discernment when it comes to information, communication, and all forms of information dissemination. Saturn is really about contemplation. It's about serious thinking. It's also about critical thinking, because Saturn asks us to kind of cut away or to limit. So sometimes that can be taking us to a level of mastery where we kind of realize what information is relevant and what isn't. With Saturn in play, my feeling is that we're now maturing as a kind of collective in terms of the way that we see social media in particular. We're now starting to become very wise to the way that AI and machine learning has perhaps learned to push our buttons and skewed the way that we see things. I think a lot of us are starting to realize, thanks to movies like The Social Dilemma, that what we see online is not necessarily neutral. So I think that's a very important distinction that we're coming to realize. We're kind of coming to a level of maturity when it comes to our use of social media, which I think is very important. And I think that was reflected very clearly in the elections, which I think is very different to the 2016 election, where a lot of people were manipulated by what they saw on social media, kind of took it at face value and didn't question facts and fake news, actually. So that's, I think, a fantastic thing to realize as we come to this lunar eclipse. Now, on a personal level, Mercury and Saturn together are really about important messages coming through. So it could also be a time when we hear things that will finally give us the information that was missing, to be able to see the full picture about a particular situation. And that will, of course, apply individually, so this will depend on where that Mercury-Saturn sextile happens in your own natal chart. So with Neptune now direct, I feel as though this is giving us an opportunity to kind of almost test us, to see whether we've learned our lesson when it comes to getting sucked into these kind of rabbit holes of like QAnon, where something sounds sort of vaguely like it could be true, and we could potentially sort of go off down this Alice in Wonderland, smoke and mirrors journey, which takes us into a bending of the facts and of information in a way that's distorted. So I think it's a kind of final test to make sure that we've learned that lesson about illusions. And then on a more positive note, the luminaries will be making a trine and a sextile to Chiron, and of course Chiron is the wounded healer, and we've had a lot of imagery around the centaur Chiron over the last month or so. First of all, with the Scorpio new moon, we had the sun and the moon making a conjunction to Centaurus, so Agena, which is a key star in the centaur, the constellation of the centaur, which has a lot of overlaps with Chiron, because Chiron is also a centaur, and both of them are really sort of half man, half beast. So it's about kind of finding that middle ground between our human nature and our more animal nature, in the sense of the emotions in the heart center that take us into the high heart versus the more kind of primitive emotions that pull us into, you know, being triggered, getting stuck, being addicted, reacting without thinking, lashing out, all of that kind of stuff. So I think we're being asked to sort of balance those two things right now. And also, as I say, I feel that with Chiron being retrograde in Aries, I do think that we also are on some level healing the divine masculine within us all, and on a collective level, because of course that's been really knocked over the last year or so, particularly with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which really kind of brought that tower down. And I think it was epitomized quite well actually in the imagery that came up around the US elections. You know, Tristia in geomancy is symbolized by the fallen tower, and of course tower imagery for me was huge around Trump Tower, the fall of the patriarchy, or certainly the need for the kind of masculine energy to up level. And of course we've just had Mars retrograde in Aries, so I do feel that there's some overlap here with healing the divine masculine energy, so that it's less about kind of trying to dominate and trying to take, you know, that kind of rape and pillage type of energy, and more about the kind of the knight that is really in service to the Grail, so that is in service to the divine feminine energy, that's there to defend the divine feminine energy, you know, that kind of nurturing energy within all of us and within the collective. So really interesting. I think a huge healing is going to take place at this particular lunar eclipse, so that's another thing, you know, to kind of point out. So those are the overall themes for the astrology. So now I think what we should do is a little geoscope, just to see what messages want to come through, you know, in relation to this particular eclipse for the collective, more specifically. So as always, we will have the Gemini moon will be here in the first house, and the Sagittarius sun will be opposite in the 7th, and so that's how we will kind of allocate the houses in this particular geoscope. And then I will put in the planets as well, the relevant planets that I discussed in the astrology into the chart, just so that you can see how the two things work together. So we'll I think first pull the card irons, and then we will pull cards specifically for the planets that are active at this eclipse, and then we'll look at the outcome. So first up, the moon. Interesting. Wow, so look at that. Mercury, as I said, is going to be very prominent at this eclipse, and here it is, Mercury in its exalted position in Virgo. So this is about coming together, conjunctio, and that for me is about union, marriage, collaboration, so kind of coming together, or a balancing of opposites. And isn't it interesting that this theme was so strong at that 1111 portal? We had hexagram 44, I think, which is all about coupling, and that's literally union in the I Ching, and so very interesting, a coming together or a marriage of sorts. And of course we will clarify this with Magpie Oracle trinkets in a little bit. So this is earth energy, and quite grounded actually. And what I'm feeling is that it's a coming together, as I say, of our ability to be open-minded on one hand, but also discerning on the other. That kind of combination of Mercury and Sagittarius energy, getting quite precise, as I was saying, refining our knowledge, refining our ability to get to the truth. And here I think is where that arrow, the archer's arrow, is going to be, you know, absolutely key. So that's really interesting. Let's have a look at the sun. Wow. So Mars here, we've got Puer, which is fire, So we've got earth and fire, and perfect for the sun in Sagittarius, Puer here. This is Mars in Aries. So of course Mars is currently in Aries, and that may be significant. Mars is certainly going to be very active during November in a positive way, much the same as that Venus was in October. Venus is having a little bit of a kind of bad hair day at the moment, shall we say. It's a bit grumpy. So it's Mars is going to be having all the fantastic aspects sort of during November. And I think we'll be very, very happy when the sun moves into Sagittarius as well, because that's another fellow fire sign. So I think, you know, Mars is going to continue to sort of get happier and happier as we come towards the last part of the year. So Puer for me is a couple of things. Sometimes it's about asserting your rights or asserting your point of view. So standing up, standing in your truth, standing up for what you believe in. It can also be about new beginnings. Very often, you know, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, and Mars likes to initiate, likes to be the first at things, likes to win. So it's that sort of really kind of that get up and go energy that I think has been missing for a lot of the year, particularly when Mars was in Pisces. That kind of motivation, or the sense of knowing where you're going and then actually taking steps to get there. It's been more kind of a hold back and wait and see what happens kind of a year, I think, on many levels. So that's interesting. All right, now, wow. So at the foot of our reading, we've got Acquisitio. Now, this is Jupiter in Sagittarius. So what was I saying about Jupiter being more prominent during the last couple of months of this year? So this for me is the basis of the reading, underlying theme, and fascinating that we're getting Sagittarius being reiterated. As I was saying, I think we are really building up to the ingress of Jupiter into Aquarius, which is going to, in many ways, signal the start of that age of Aquarius that we've been talking about all year. So this is fantastic energy, really, really positive, expansive. This is all about gain. So I think what we are gaining at this particular full moon lunar eclipse is a sense of perspective on the meaning of all the experiences that we've been through in 2020, both individually and on a collective level. Because I think that's what's been missing during this whole year. It's been almost sort of a kind of a deepening and kind of going down a rabbit hole and trying to cope on a lot of levels with what's been quite chaotic and difficult for a lot of people. But what I think what's been missing is the why, the meaning behind these experiences, and that is what Jupiter is so good at providing. And I think here it really feeds into the idea of the Sagittarius Gemini axis, really getting a sense of what all the important events of 2020 mean to us individually, why they've happened, what we've learned from these experiences, and how we'll take this information forward into our, you know, into the following year, into the next eclipse cycle. So I think that's fantastic. Now let's have a look at the wow. So that's even, I mean, wow, just amazing. So lots and lots of fire energy here. Again, we've got Fortuna Major, which is the sun in Leo, and again, fire energy. So we've got 3 fire geomantic figures here. Again, very, very positive. This is almost for me like the sun in the tarot cards. Fortuna Major is a kind of luck, expansion, feeling confident, shining your light, being recognized, being seen. And it's also about success on a sort of, you know, on a kind of physical level, you know, on a kind of materialistic level. So finally, you know, feeling as though what you've been working towards all year is starting to you're kind of starting to show signs of progress, of achievement, that kind of thing. So I think a wonderfully sort of jubilant, celebratory kind of energy as we head towards the Christmas holidays and Sagittarius season. So that's fantastic, really uplifting, positive, optimistic energy. And that was my feeling, you know, as we moved into that Scorpio new moon, that I felt as though the return of hope was what Jupiter was bringing back to the party from literally that 1111 portal and the Jupiter Pluto conjunction, Jupiter almost brought the kind of positive gloss to the Pluto aspect, which has been quite heavy and dark, difficult, dark night kind of energy. Jupiter then bringing in the more positive, the flip side of all of this. So that's really, really good. Okay, so let's have a look now at the planets that are going to be active. So as I said, Mercury and Saturn are going to be prominent at this particular eclipse because of their sextile. So Mercury will be in Scorpio, and that means that it will be here in the 6th house. And Saturn is still currently in Capricorn. It will be moving into Aquarius in December, but at the moment it's still in the sign of Capricorn. So Capricorn is of course in the 8th house here. So those are the two geometric figures that we're going to be having a look at next. So first Mercury. Oh wow. And then let's pull out Saturn. Oh my goodness. I mean, you cannot make this up. So remember what I was saying about Saturn and the fallen tower when I was doing the forecast for the US elections. Tristia was, I think, the outcome of the reading, and it kept coming up again and again. And one of the symbols for Tristia is actually the fallen tower, which for me has been such a prominent symbol, this year, from the idea of the lightning striking the top of the tower in the tarot card, where we've got a crown, and of course, we've had corona virus, which literally is Latin for crown, and we've also had a lot of astrologically a lot of emphasis on crowns, with aspects being made to Alphecca, which is of course in the Corona Borealis, the northern crown. That was prominent at the US elections, and it was also prominent earlier in the year. I can't remember which of the eclipses it was prominent at, but it was prominent at one of them. So for me, this is really about Tristia is also Saturn in Aquarius energy, and that's where we kind of headed. But on a sort of purely geomantic level, this is air energy, and this is about kind of mourning loss, realizing what we need to let go of. And as I say, I do feel that a lot of the time what we realized this year, thinking back to that Mercury Gemini axis, was how the mind can actually be the real source of misery in our lives. So the more that we try to sort of overemphasize logic and facts in a purely out of context, for example, or without considering the emotional implications of a decision, the more we just end up going round and round and round in circles. And I think the same is true of information. Facts taken out of context can very often turn into fake news, or can be very misleading. So I think what we are learning to do is to pare back and to realize what isn't relevant, what is not true, what is making us miserable, and kind of letting go of that. So I think that's very, very interesting. And then Mercury here is driving wonderfully with Laetitia. So Laetitia is a very upbeat geomantic figure. It's water energy actually, and of course Mercury being in Scorpio, it is actually in a water sign. And Laetitia here is very upbeat. Again, it's Jupiter energy. So as I was saying, isn't it fascinating that Jupiter is becoming so prominent as we move towards Sagittarius season? So Jupiter here in the sign of Pisces, the water sign of Pisces, indicating expansion in the emotional body as well. So this is what I feel is the key that we're learning at this particular time with Mercury, is how to kind of blend information and data with the wisdom that comes from knowledge that comes from other sources. So there's the knowledge and the wisdom of the heart, for example, which was so valued by ancient civilizations like Egypt. If you think about the figure of Ma'at, there's a sense of balancing life experience and information through the heart chakra, rather than the brain, which your Western culture tends to sort of overemphasize. You know, everything is sort of like, it has to come back or be reduced to chemicals in the brain, or the way that the brain processes information. But I mean, as we know from computers, it's not the computer that is the source of the data. The computer simply processes the data that comes in through nodes like, you know, the internet or Wi-Fi, or a software program. It just runs the program, and for me that's what the brain does. It simply processes information that comes from other sources. So to sort of root everything in the brain and in logic, in left brain thinking, I think is to limit. It's to really limit ourselves and also make ourselves quite miserable. So I think that that's what this is pointing to. If you think that these are in a way diametrically opposite energies, Jupiter and Saturn, you know, on the one hand, and joy on the one hand and sorrow on the other. So this is what we are balancing at this particular lunar eclipse, is seeing the value in what has been quite difficult experiences, often very tragic or sorrowful, but seeing the upside to whatever's happened, seeing the meaning, the silver linings in what we've learned from these experiences, what we've gained, in other words, from losses come gain. I think that's the ultimate message here, and that's why we've got Jupiter in Sagittarius Acquisitio here at the bottom of the reading. So I think that's really wonderfully quite, you know, very hopeful and very positive. And then of course the other planetoid that will be prominent is Chiron. As I said, the Sun and the Moon will both be making positive aspects to Chiron in Aries. So in this particular chart, Aries is, where is Aries? This is Gemini, so Aries will be somewhere at the top. So Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, 11th house. Interesting. Here in the 11th house we have Carse, which is earth energy, so this kind of jives with Conjunctio. And isn't it interesting that Conjunctio is about coming together with others, and here Chiron is in the 11th house, which is groups, so you know, connecting with others on a group level. Now Carse for me is to a large extent about limitation or loss. It can be about imprisonment, you know, feeling trapped, and certainly I think for a lot of people being in lockdown has not been an easy experience. But you know, again, if we look for the silver lining in those types of experiences, think about, for example, the initiation of a shaman. Very often they are put into like a coffin, or they're kind of they're given an experience of sensory deprivation, or they're buried alive, and this forces them to let go of their five senses, so let go of their usual ways of perceiving reality, the 3D reality, and really coming into their spiritual senses, so seeing in the dark, the seeing of the third eye, which allows us to see into other dimensions and to get that higher perspective that I was talking about in relation to the Gemini Sagittarius axis. So, you know, accessing wisdom, and sometimes, you know, the way that we learn and grow is usually through suffering on some level. That's just our nature. If we're happy, we tend to sort of like think, oh no, let's not change the status quo. I don't want to question anything too deeply. I'm very happy with where I'm at right now. I don't really want to grow. I'm very content where I am. So very often we're pushed into instances of collective suffering or individual suffering, and I think here this is the 11th house, so it's collective suffering, where we are separated from other individuals. You know, if we think about social distancing, if we think about not being able to socialize in restaurants or in public, being cut off from our friends on a lot of levels. It's really forced us, I think, on many levels to confront our wounds, and of course Chiron is the wounded healer. His wisdom comes from his wounds, and that I think has been the major lesson of 2020 is really coming to terms with healing our wounds, seeing the wisdom that's come from those experiences, how we've grown as souls, as individuals and as a collective, and become more compassionate and empathetic as a result. Something that I think is very much embodied in Joe Biden, who of course has the Sun and Mercury conjunct that star Arcana that's in Centaurus. So I think a wonderful linking of these energies. You might want to go back and watch my New Moon in Scorpio video where I talk about that, and you'll see the link between Chiron the Centaur and the constellation Centaurus, and its I think it's its alpha star Arcana. So I think that's what we're talking about here. But let's just clarify quickly with some trinkets before we end the reading and have a look at the overall kind of outcome. So starting with Conjunctio. Oh, how wonderful. So yes, again, for me this is all about riches, and not necessarily riches on a financial level, but more about the riches that we gain when we come together with others and sort of work collectively towards something as as kind of humanity, and then I think also about flow on some level. I think that we really had to learn how to kind of go with the flow, on so many levels this year. So many things have been beyond our control circumstantially, and I think that we've really had to learn to surrender certain things as a collective in order to cope and just to sort of get on with things, really. Oh, the other thing I should do, of course, is pull out Neptune. That T-square to Neptune. Where is Neptune? It's here. So Neptune is in Pisces, which is here at the midheaven, actually. So isn't that interesting? There's a natural T-square going on here. So yeah, fascinating that although Neptune is making difficult, challenging squares to the nodes, actually. Which are also in Sagittarius and Gemini, so not to the Sun and the Moon, but to the nodes. That ultimately good has come from it, in the sense that we've kind of learned lessons about perspective and about discernment, how to avoid the rabbit hole of illusion and escapism. I think that's been a huge lesson this year. So yeah, we'll also pull some trinkets for Neptune. Okay, so let's have one now for the Sun. So this is the crossroads, and isn't it fascinating that there's this sense of having to make a choice on some level. Between what direction, what direction we go in next. So almost a kind of fork in the road type of a vibe, making important decisions on the way forward, which I think fits in a way with the idea of the arrow, the bow and the arrow, and the target. So deciding what our target's going to be moving into 2021, and what we want to, what intentions we want to set at that solar eclipse in December, because that will of course kind of usher in a new 6-month cycle, much as it did last year. Actually, we had that solar eclipse in Capricorn in December, which took us into the energy of January and right through until June. So similar kind of thing. I think it's asking us to get really clear on what goals and intentions we want to set to kind of plant at that really important gateway that happens starting with the eclipse on the 14th of December, and then moving into the corridor of the winter solstice and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So focusing, honing our energy, really almost setting our sights. Right, let's have one for Mercury. Oh, wonderful. So again, a reiteration, I feel, of Fortuna Major. So seeing the, as I was saying, seeing the gift in the sort of difficulties that we've had. Oh, I've put these cards the wrong way around, haven't I? So that should be there and that should be there. So yes, happiness, really cultivating our happiness in the mental body, really positive thinking, optimism arising, as I say, with Jupiter coming back into prominence. So really cultivating positive thinking now, expecting good outcomes, you know, in the next phase that's coming. So we've got the fox here. I can't tell you how many times the fox has come out in readings this year. So this for me is all about being smart, being clever. And again, I think this is about discernment when it comes to information of all kinds, particularly so-called facts. You know, I mean, I don't know about you, but the amount of so-called facts that have come out in relation to COVID-19 and the sort of medical profession, I really think that we're starting to see how much science, you know, can be as much smoke and mirrors, and a question of perspective and an arranging of the facts to suit whatever the agenda is. You know, this is, I think, particularly true with Big Pharma. That, you know, I think that we're becoming a lot smarter when it comes to how we process and discern information here, which I think is the lesson of Saturn. You know, Saturn's all about mastery. It's about up-leveling. It's about, you know, really graduating when it comes to the way that we think and that we you know, process and make decisions. I think that's a good way to put it. Okay, let's have one for Chiron. What was I saying about the tower? Isn't that fascinating? So, the tower coming out here with Chiron. And here I feel the tower is particularly related to the tarot card, the tower, which is Mars ruled. So, the tower itself being quite a phallic symbol, and of course, I think part of that fallen tower symbolism this year has been about the Jupiter, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which has been about the falling away of old structures, particularly patriarchal structures, and of course Chiron's in Aries. So as I say, I do feel that there's huge, there's kind of a huge shift going on in terms of masculine energy at the moment. I think those leaders who have been almost exploiting the kind of downside of patriarchy at the expense of minority groups, the collective, you know, so the majority of people, in the sense of, you know, the 1% versus the 99%, and of course, and also just taking over positions of power and leadership in society, but not actually contributing, just being on the take, basically. So those energies are on the wane. I kind of feel like, you know, we could also be talking about potentially imprisonment for certain individuals who've been kind of conning the general public. But I think on a more positive level, again, the tower is also about wisdom. It's about, you know, the crown at the top of that tower being replaced, or having that lightning bolt of downloads kind of coming in and having perspective shift so that we see things, you know, almost like revelations. We start to see the truth of a situation, and that in itself can be quite healing. Okay, let's have one for Neptune. Wow. So again, pointing to messages. This is the letter, and that for me is all about written communication or messages. And of course, Mercury is the ruler of communication on so many levels. So I think here what we're talking about is incoming downloads from spirit and from other dimensions coming in. And so even though we are talking about a T-square here, I still think that this is potentially about positive shifts into, you know, as we learn more and we get more information. So let's just have a look at the outcome of the reading. I mean, you can't make this up. So, yes, overall outcome, literally, from loss to kind of gain on the emotional level. So, moving away from this perspective of what we've lost, what's kind of passed us by, what we've had to let go of, moving into a much happier, joyful space, because of course sometimes we need to kind of make room for happiness to kind of flood in. If you think about happiness as being like water, you need a container for that water, and sometimes that means you've got to throw out whatever's in the jug currently in order to make space for for joy to sort of fill your being. So I really feel it's kind of moving from loss to joy, and then finally, again, I think this also came out at the Scorpio new moon, Albus, which is a blank sheet of paper. So interesting that we've got the letter here at the as the outcome of our reading. So rewriting the script of our lives, rewriting the story of humanity, taking it into a much more positive place. I do feel that we have jumped timelines since June with that Sagittarius lunar eclipse. I really did fear, particularly for America, when all that unrest and rioting broke out. I kind of thought, oh, this is taking us down quite a dark path, and I do think that we have chosen to go in a different direction as a collective, and that is wonderful news. So Albus here, I think, really summing things up. As I was saying, it is a lunar eclipse in Gemini, first of all, and here we've got Mercury in Gemini. Secondly, Mercury is of course the dominant force at this full moon eclipse. It rules Gemini. It will be prominent with the sextile to Saturn. So I think it's really about pressing the reset button within the mental body, deciding to think different thoughts, to see things from a new perspective, to let go of information that has confused us, led us down rabbit holes, led to a lot of unrest and worry and anxiety in the mental body, and moving in a much more positive, optimistic, joyful direction as we head into that December eclipse corridor. So I think, wow, I mean, overall, I think such a positive reading. Really wonderful to see. Do let me know if you have got something out of this reading. As I say, I will be doing eclipse forecasts in depth for this last set of eclipses on my website, as well as eclipse horoscopes. So if that is something that you're interested in and you want to know, how these energies are going to work on an individual level, do subscribe to my website. Otherwise, you can always book a one-to-one reading with me. Details are below in the description box. But I'm going to leave it there. Sending you lots of love and good Jupiter inspired wishes for this upcoming lunar eclipse, and I'll catch you again for my solar eclipse forecast, which will be in a couple of weeks.